that's what God is banking on. That, Jesus didn't come and say, okay, I'll do everything myself. I will solve the whole, hey, I'm God, I'm divine. I will solve the whole problem by myself.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Sons of Ignatius podcast. My name is Father David Lugo, coming at you from Miami, Florida, and I'm joined, as always, with...
Father Niall and David.
Who are you?
I'm back with you. You're stuck with me again, Dave, for another episode.
That's right.
I hope you enjoyed your solo run there a few weeks ago.
That's right. I was leaving it open-ended to see if I was going to trick our audience to have another solo episode with me. But no, we are back and better as ever. Yeah. You had another episode in there mixed in too with Eamon, the Jesuit nun.
Yeah, so Eamon is here on a placement here in Dublin. So I thought let's take advantage, of him being here and get I think Eamon's a great communicator and he has great enthusiasm for life in general and for his mission as a Jesuit. So yeah, I was really happy to hear about him speaking about pilgrimage and the kind of journey he was on.
Yeah. So I imagine that Eamon is there, kind of what we've been talking about with formation. He's there to really focus in on what I was talking about last time in your absence, which is that pastoral side of formation.
Yeah, he's getting a really good, I'd say, broad experience here at the parish because, okay, there's the stuff going on in the parish. There, like for example, we Novena of Grace. So he and Pavel were really just jumping in and helping in all sorts of ways for the running of that. Then there's primary school. There's a secondary school nearby. They've been doing work in our polytunnel sort of eco project as well. So helping out as well with the nearby centre which serves the homeless and people in recovery. So I'm really happy how they've gotten a really broad experience coming here. That a parish is it's much more than a church. There's so much life going on in and around the church. That's right. So I think that's been really good.
Yeah. What's interesting is that so thinking about it through the lens of formation and also, the word that I think you guys were using while you were talking was experiment, or probation or trial or a test. I just find it interesting that the pastoral formation aspect can also be a test. I've had also some struggles in the pastoral world where it's this is also a test to see if this is something for you, because some of the work that we invite a novice to could be very uncomfortable. Like he was mentioning L'Arche. I know some guys have some hard times when they go to L'Arche because it can be a difficult assignment for some guys, And so it's just kind of an interesting thing that the pastoral formation can also be a bit of a test, just like it can be a difficult thing to learn how to pray or study or integrate, aspects of your life.
And one thing I've noticed about and what I've been really impressed with both Pavel and Eamon, some of the work that I've been asking them to do has been obviously pastoral, they're in on the Bible study group, they're in at the young adult prayer group. It's clearly spiritual, ministry, you could say, engaging with people at that spiritual level. Other work has been just humdrum tasks that need to be done in a parish. Can you move those chairs from there to there, or can you help set up the teas and coffees afterwards, or would you mind wheeling these candles to where they need to go? And that help has been invaluable because I find myself doing really practical tasks. Pastoral work is often just the practicalities that need to be done in order to set up the more spiritual or religious encounter. And so I think they've got a good sense of that. They have been doing spiritual ministry as well, but they've also been extremely good at just doing the practicalities that sort of go before and after that. Say
sure. Yeah, I remember in our province we have a way of talking about the big pastoral sections of our formation time. Like the novitiate has a lot of it, and then the later time with Regency of taking some breaks between our study time and to do some full-time ministry. One of the ways that we talk about it is what we're really after is trying to see if this man is employable. Yeah. Can this guy hold a job? Now that's a bit of a very reductive way of looking at it, but it's helpful because it's one thing to be a very studious person or to be a monk, to be very mystical, but it's prayer and work, with St. Benedict. Even the monks know that you have to be able to work, and if you can't work, then what's going on, There's something lacking there.
So this doesn't just go for priesthood. It also applies to all sorts of walks of life. Imagine if you're a teacher, I would say, maybe 70% of your time is just doing quite practical tasks, preparing lessons, getting books, getting resources, keeping kids under control. It's not kind of inspiring work, but all of that is done so that at a certain moment you can say, you can really teach, or you can really shape someone, or educate. And I think mission, what mission is like that. It's often, there's a lot of preparation. It's setting up meetings and making sure all the logistics and the practicalities are covered. And then when all that's done, then there might be a little encounter, with the Lord, or a spiritual moment, or a holy moment, or something very real happens. But it's not all and that's what makes it all worthwhile, I guess. That provides the why for all the the less glamorous stuff.
Sure, absolutely. So let's take a step back now, since we're finishing up this 4-episode arc of Pastoral Dabo Vovis, and you weren't with me for that episode on pastoral formation. I just want to give you a chance, if there was anything that in that section that you wanted to maybe go a little deeper on, and then we can maybe just take a final stab at summarizing our impression of Pastoral Dabo Vovis and the 4 big pillars before we maybe transition to what our next set of episodes is going to look like. Was there something in the episode that I recorded that maybe you wanted to go a little deeper in, that you were listening to, that you didn't get your say in?
I mean, you brought out the point of availability, I think, really well, that a pastor needs to be available to his flock and or her flock, and to be really present and with the people, whoever it is that you're ministering to. You just have to be there and available in a personal way. So I think that's really important, and to reflect on those pastoral experiences as well. I think that's one of the strong points of the pastoral section in Pastores Dabo Vobis. It really introduces the whole notion of pastoral theology, or makes it sort of mainstream, that theology isn't just taking the scriptures and reflecting on them. It's also taking the life of the church. What happens when we are doing church, when we're doing the whole gospel thing together. What's going on there, including those pastoral encounters and initiatives, and then saying, okay, well, what was good in that? What was not good in that? How can we do it better? Where was the Lord's Spirit working there? So that's the whole area of pastoral theology, which I think is really important. So they would be, so availability to be with the people, serving as best you can, being with them as best you can, and then also reflecting on that. Okay, and doing that,
right.
So what you call the pastoral cycle. So reflecting on it. So then learning from it, etc. So that's some of the strong points of the document.
Sure. As you're talking, one thing that I'm being reminded of is something that people like Bishop Robert Barron, who's big in the United States with social media in the Catholic world, one thing that he always harps on that I find very interesting as sort of a summary statement for this document is that in the early church, the greatest theologians, the greatest minds were also bishops.
Right.
So there was this intersection between the intellectual life of the church, the spiritual health of the flock, and the caring of the flock by her pastors, and also like the administrative life of the church. Like there was this well integrated, and of course it's a little bit idyllic looking back now after 2,000 years, but there's something to be said about that sort of vision of there's a harmonization between all these different 4 pillars, that when it works well, it can really create good, just good pastors, good people who are good missionary disciples. And I think something has happened over the course of the life of the church where it's like, well, I'm just a really good person that prays. I don't really study. Or like, I'm a really good academician, but I'm not a really good like people person. And it's like, hold on a second. Like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's what we're after. Like, you don't need to be perfect at all these, but like, you got to be able to exercise each of these muscles,
Yeah.
And like in that reflective aspect, that reflective circle that you're describing, it's like, that's a place where I find myself often wondering, it's like, okay, where am I not strong in any of these 4 pillars? Like, that's a really good invitation to be like, I am really good at being a people person, but I am not good at my prayer life. My prayer life is really suffering right now, or something. Like in the reflective side, like, okay, I can flag that as an area that I need to pray in, because I think it's a responsibility of any pastor to take all 4 of these all the time as important, instead of saying like, well, Niall is a really good, thinker, but he's not really great with people or something. It's like, well, that's that's a problem. I don't.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to be the best with people, but he should be okay with people.
Yeah. The church is going through a synodal process at the moment as well, Dave, and it's really bringing this reflection, I'd say pastoral reflection to the fore in the life of the church now. So, for example, in our parish, we've had 2 meetings over the last few weeks, and people are, who never had the chance to speak before are kind of saying, this is what it's been like for me in this parish and in the church. And, lots of positives, some negatives as well. But it's really important that that the priests are hearing that, okay, with the best will in the world and all the best intentions,
right?
We go out and we do our work and we offer what we have to offer. But is it working, or in what ways is it working, and in what ways is it not? So I've been just from hearing the first fruits of these sort of listening sessions, I can see this is a rich source of pastoral reflection. I mean, pastoral formation is always ongoing, but I can really see how my pastoral formation is let's say fast forwarding at the moment. I'm really it's progressing fast just because of this synodal process.
I was going to say, could you think of another pillar that's not in these 4? Like, is there another big pillar that we're missing?
I'm not sure if it's a new pillar, but it's a dimension of pastoral formation which I think is lacking in the document. It seems to me that pastoral formation is very much oriented towards, I would say, the individual, sort of attending to or caring for the individual person, and sort of dealing with the kind of immediate pastoral needs that are presenting. So, somebody has lost their job, or somebody's going through a painful separation or divorce, or somebody's getting baptized, or whatever is the next need. That priests need to be able to respond to that, or this person needs catechesis or whatever. But one thing I thought was absent was sort of zooming out and looking at what are the larger kind of social, let's say, economic, structural forces that are shaping your congregation or your flock or the church at large. So it's one thing to say, okay, one of your parishioners has fallen in hard times, and we need to get him back up on his feet again. Whatever, we need to get him into detox, or we need to get him a job or whatever. But to zoom out and say, okay, well, maybe there was some personal moral fault, or maybe he made a bad decision somewhere along the way. But what are the broader, larger sort of societal forces that are affecting not just him but all of the people who come to church? For example, like there's a homelessness crisis like a housing crisis in Dublin and Ireland at the moment. So you can't say that it's just the individual's fault if they end up on the street, because there just isn't enough, housing for people, and there's and people's positions really very quickly become quite precarious. And that's one thing I would have liked to have seen in Pastoris Dabo Vobis, was that it's also the priest's job to be up to speed on these more structural issues, like how's the housing market working? How is sort of food working?
Right.
I mean, we also have farmers being paid absolute pittance for their product, because they're selling to larger and larger retailers who can just command a price. So yeah, it's a buyer's market. Right. So these are things which aren't affecting sort of individuals, I mean, aren't evidently, that individuals aren't aware of them necessarily on a day-to-day basis, but they are large sort of more macro forces that are really, can be having very detrimental effect on your flock, on the church. And I would say it is the priest's job to be conscious of these and to articulate them and to help people, help their flock understand the world in which they're living, understand the system in which they're living, understand the wider sort of context that is shaping their lives. And it's not just down to individual sort of moral virtue or vice that kind of shapes that determines your path in life. It also requires the context in which we live to be promoting the common good. So, and that, I suppose that leads us into, in short, we should be preaching more on and using the resources of Catholic social teaching more than just like the guidance of the gospel for the individual.
Sure. I would say, like, I think there's something to be said about like the intellectual pillar and the pastoral pillar probably together seem to condense down to a conclusion like that, where it's like, oh, of course, like Catholic social teaching would be something that would naturally fit into the intellectual formation or the pastoral reflection of a person. But I think that's a bit of a cop-out because in the end, the things that are included in intellectual formation are everything. And it's like, you can't, if you don't underline those things that are particularly important, then, they get taken for granted and they get, skirted underneath the table. And so it's interesting to flag that, because I think you're right that there's a particular emphasis that's placed on formation intellectually and pastorally that's really focused on all kinds of things that don't really require of me to know anything about the reality of the people around me. And so to really put like an emphasis on that, I think would be a really helpful part of our formation. Like the number of times I hear people complain that priests don't know anything about like finances, just as a simple example. So that's not a justice issue per se or a Catholic social teaching issue per se, but it's very much related to it. How many issues that pertain to the well-being of the faithful in a systemic way have to do with like the proper, financial health of a sector of the city or of the city at large. And if the priest is completely absent to that reality, then he's kind of talking way beyond where people's reality is. And I think it's really important, because if it's taken for granted that like, oh, no, in his intellectual formation, he should have some sort of social analysis. Well, if that's taken for granted, then it's not ever going to happen, because we have plenty of examples of priests who are just so out of touch with how things work, myself included,
You're essentially wading into the area of politics. Imagine you are a priest living in the Soviet Union, during the communist era, and all you preached about was the importance of individual kind of, moral virtue and, looking for your family, looking after your family, saying your prayers. And you never once spoke about the fact that everybody was being governed by, an authoritarian dictator who did not give you the right to vote or to protest against government policy or to, have private property. This was, that would just be preposterous. That the priest wouldn't identify those macro factors that are working against the common good and and the good of society, because they were just focusing on the individuals making good decisions within their contexts. Well, the same goes for the West. We live in capitalist democratic societies, but we still need to be bringing that macro lens to into our preaching. So I like to think of it in terms of horizons. So I think preaching tends to focus on the individual's horizon of, day-to-day things that they're encountering. So, whatever in family life, in work life, in, rest and relaxation, whatever, like the individual experience of prayer, whatever. So, and then we tend to skip to the ultimate horizon, which is God and the eternal and what is everlasting.
Yeah.
But we kind of skip over that middle horizon, which is these kind of macro factors that are shaping our lives and experiences, but we're not immediately aware of them. So, for example, we're not immediately aware that the level of CO2 in the atmosphere is dangerously high, and that this is causing, ice caps to melt, and it's sort of intensifying the force of our storms and hurricanes and everything. It's really sort of, it's supercharging our weather system. So nobody's, on a day-to-day basis, nobody's aware of that. But it is a reality. And it's kind of at that middle level. It's the fact that our economies are largely based on the burning of fossil fuels that's causing that. So I think it's really important to bring that in. It's not part of our immediate experience. Neither is it the ultimate horizon. You know, I mean, the ultimate is God, but it's in that middle level. We need to, we need to talk about that.
So let me push back a little bit. So what we talked about, or at least what I mentioned in the pastoral episode that I did, and that I know you and I have talked about before, is also the importance of collaboration with people in the world. And so I just want to maybe push back and ask you, maybe how do you see what you're saying as maybe stepping into the areas of expertise of other people with whom we should be collaborating, rather than me becoming the expert in meteorology or the expert in, sustainable farming or the expert in, the financial sector. How is it that the invitation is not for me to do that per se, but to, develop good bonds with people who are professionals in those worlds and to invite them into a space of collaboration?
I mean, and it's good to have maybe a working knowledge of what the basics are, and then also to invite people into your parish or into whatever your community or whatever that looks like to share this.
Right. Yeah, because I gotta say, it's one of the most. I say this with a smile on my face because it's happened a lot where I've seen this in the pastoral world. There's nothing more cringy than a man talking from the pulpit about something he has no expertise in. Like, it's so cringy, Like when you can just tell, right. He's like, oh, he read like an article about this or something, and it's like, okay, all right, okay. So having a working knowledge is very important, but just sort of like talking off of like Twitter. Like Twitter knowledge of something, but I think that there's a real beautiful invitation to collaboration when it's like, oh no, like, it also requires in me as a priest a certain level of humility that says like, oh my gosh, I don't know squat about sustainable farming, but man, in my jurisdiction here, like, there are some people doing some really good stuff with sustainable farming, or even like urban farming, like all that stuff that I don't know anything about. And what kind of humility does it require to say like, okay, I need these people to feel empowered to have a voice in the parish and also to teach me, but also to like, I can trust them and let them have a say at the table, about a seat at the table, to where like this not, sort of like very long horizon of our eternal salvation is what we're talking about. But like, no, people's livelihood and well-being, these people have something to say about that, and I at least have enough working knowledge to know that they belong at the table, and even invite them to collaborating with me and with our parish generally in such a way to where it's like, I'm not overstepping and saying like, oh, again, like the priest says that he knows everything and he really just is talking, nonsense or something.
I don't think people expect the priest to be an expert. And you don't have to be an expert in order to legitimately speak about something. But, it doesn't take an expert to know that, there's, for example, here at the moment, there's a war going on in Ukraine. There is a flood of refugees now coming to Europe. So, okay, I don't need to be an expert on politics and military operations to be able to say that, okay, the people in Ukraine are experiencing bombardment, and it's our Christian duty to offer them shelter. And but during the week we have somebody who is an expert giving a talk on the situation over there, or somebody I like funny an example comes to mind. I wish I could remember her name, but the first journalist to be killed in the Syria conflict. She I can remember. I can see her face. She had an eye patch. Which she obviously, suffered some kind of eye injury as in her work as a war correspondent. But she spoke in her church about her work as a war correspondent, journalist, and spoke about it in terms of her faith. Whereas like she saw her work as shining light on dark places, where people who are waging war generally want to keep all their dirty secrets. Secret and keep war crimes secret. And she was like, no, my job is to shine a light on that and let the truth be heard. And I thought, wow, that's just a wonderful example of it doesn't matter what the priest says about the war situation. It's going to be way more compelling and interesting if it comes from the person who was there, who is it's first-hand experience. So I'm all for that, Dave. Getting more voices into the church.
Oh, absolutely. I guess, going back to maybe just to summarize what we've been talking about a little bit with Pastoral Dabovis, like I really appreciate what you've said about, it doesn't have to be a fifth pillar as if those pillars, are ironclad or anything, but yeah, so emphasizing the communal dimension of mission, as opposed to, it's like this individual needs to be, flexing all four of these muscles all throughout his ministry, and instead saying like, no, like there's a wider network here of professionals. There's a wider network of a community of collaborators that this minister that we're training, or this pastor that we're training, needs to be a part of this matrix, and needs to be sensitive to that matrix, and also find himself as an essential part of that matrix, that he brings something to the table, like in our case as Jesuits and as priests, something essential to the table, but also a great responsibility and also a great ability to bring people together. That's one thing I've noticed in my life as a priest, that the number of people who just need a space and look to the priest to open that space up of encounter. So like the ministry that I've been leading here with young adults has been wonderful for many reasons. And one of the reasons it's been great is just because you have all these young professionals that live in downtown Miami who work in all kinds of different professions. Like we have people who work in supply chain, people who work in finance, people who work in retail, people who work in law enforcement, people who are lawyers. And these people don't know each other until like the parish became this common space where they felt welcome, and they're meeting and cross-pollinating, and there's a beautiful collaboration that can happen just by us opening the door. Even like I don't have to do very much as a priest to encourage this kind of global communal collaboration. It's just really like the church can be a welcoming place for that, And I think that's a really beautiful thing, to be thinking about how a man is being trained for the priesthood in a way that he sees beyond his invaluable or indispensable ministry. It's like, well, like there are so many other people who are doing really great things, and I need to open up that channel to where they can find each other and also find a voice.
As pastors, our job is not just to minister to people, it's to empower or enable people to minister to each other. Like it's forming missionary disciples.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what it's all about. I mean, and basically that's what God is banking on. That, Jesus didn't come and say, okay, I'll do everything myself. I will solve the whole, here, I'm God, I'm divine, I will solve the whole problem of evil by myself. Okay, in a way, he has done that, like he has won the victory, but in a way that totally involves all of humanity in that great project of redemption. And it's the same for for priests or for ministers. Yeah, you want to get other people ministering. I think I have lots of teaching examples. Sorry, because I have some experience as a teacher. But, as a teacher, your job, you've been successful when your students can teach. So my job isn't just to teach, it's to, if I can get my students teaching each other and learning from each other, that's when I've really done a good job. So I think that's a really good outlook, Dave, on being a pastor. It's creating those spaces and opportunities for people to serve each other, not just for you to serve them.
Absolutely, yeah. Hey, so let's transition now. I want to maybe spend the last moments here of our episode this week just introducing what our next major arc is, and you've introduced it by name, but just maybe talking a little bit at length. We want to spend some time in the next 4 episodes diving deep into Catholic social teaching. It's that aspect of the Church's doctrine that is very much with eyes wide open, looking at the real needs and the concerns of the people of our time, and so. Yeah, so we'll have another 4-episode arc looking at the major pillars, perhaps, of Catholic social teaching. Depending on who you ask, there's 9 or 7 or 10 pillars of Catholic social teaching. Maybe we can condense those down to 4, the 4 major ones, and we'll take the next 4 episodes to really dive deep into that. But before we get into those specific pillars of Catholic social teaching, maybe we could just spend some time talking about what is Catholic social teaching, where does it come from, where does the tradition start? And in my experience of my own education, what I remember, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Niall, but so Catholic social teaching is very much a part of the gospel, regardless. Like it's very much a fundamental aspect of Christian revelation, but really sort of comes to the fore in the contemporary church with Pope Leo XIII in 1891 with an encyclical called Rerum Novarum. So on the new things, where he talks about at length the sort of the Industrial Revolution, the agricultural revolution in the West, and thinking about how new problems are arising that were not befalling the people and the workers of the early part of the 19th century. But in the latter half of the 19th century, it's like, wow, we have all of these new issues that pertain to workers' rights, that pertain to human dignity, that pertain to the relationship between individuals and the state, et cetera, that he's like, let's write a whole encyclical about this to start addressing that. And that started this long encyclical tradition from from Leo the 13th all the way up until Pope Francis, where we have every couple of years, anniversary documents and further documents that, address all kinds of issues, from human dignity to disarmament to the environment to the trafficking of persons to the relationship between a person and their right to work. And all that. So you have all of these wonderful documents and church teachings around the social question that really was spearheaded by Leo the 13th at the end of the 19th century. So it has come to be called Catholic social teaching is kind of the distilling of all of that pontifical teaching and all that. But it's kind of like a scatter plot. There's sort of a lot out there,
Like each of these documents, encyclicals, was written in response to a specific set of problems or injustices. So for example, with the first one with Leo the 13th, Rerum Novarum, there were mass abuses of workers' rights happening. People were working in unsafe conditions. Factory workers. We take a safe working conditions for granted now in the West, at least. But that wasn't always the case, and so the church really needed to advocate on behalf of workers and also to establish their right to unionize and to engage in collective bargaining with their employers. So again, it's very much at the level of the collective and the macro, commenting on the macro situation and the macro forces that are really shaping people's lives and society. So, and then, moving forward, obviously there was the Cold War. So there was kind of the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc, and John Paul II wanted to say something about that. There was colonialism. Church wanted to say something about that. The sort of underdevelopment of let's say, the Third World, as it was then called, or the developing world. That was a huge issue. And then, moving forward, then sort of inequality between rich and poor, the environmental crisis, or the social environmental crisis, which Pope Francis has written on comprehensively in Laudato Si. So there's all these issues, sort of macro issues, which the church is responding to and wants to educate people on. But I would say, apart from learning about those issues, which are really important, it's important, I think, just to develop that consciousness, so that whatever it is, whatever situation you find yourself in, or whatever place or time in history you're in, it's to develop that ability to zoom out and kind of go, okay, what is happening at the macro level, where I am or where I'm living, and to be able to pick up the newspaper or read commentators who are kind of saying, okay, basically this is what's happening, here. So, news tends to focus on, and we live in a news culture, on kind of what's happening today, and then tomorrow we've kind of forgotten about it. But to be able to zoom out and go, no, what's basically been happening in the last 10, 20 years, economically, socially, politically, environmentally, what's the basic story here? I think that's the real fruit of Catholic social teaching is getting people to a heightened awareness of what they are part of what they're participating in.
Absolutely. I would say, so for the sake of organizing our next arc, which is going to be on Catholic social teaching, one of the things that's also not just the awareness that you're talking about, Niall, to the general concerns on the macro level, and also our participation in that, both in the negative sense and also in the positive sense of how we can, participate for the sake of change. So one of the other fruits of Catholic social teaching, and this is the way that sort of the different Episcopal conferences, and I think even the compendium on social doctrine from the church, tries to organize all of these conciliar and papal and episcopal documents, tries to distill them down into major themes, rather than just sort of like hot button topics, like let's talk about euthanasia, let's talk about global warming, let's talk about the death penalty, let's talk about abortion. Tries to distill them down into major themes that I think undergird all of them as sort of general principles or themes that we can do reflection on. And I think, it might be helpful, instead of just jumping in the next 4 episodes on different like hot button topics, maybe taking each of these themes. Maybe I'm on the list here from, I pulled up the list from the U.S. Bishops Conference, and they have 7 themes for Catholic social teaching. And I think other Episcopal conferences maybe have organized them differently. But like, just as an example, maybe we can organize our next set of episodes around some of these. So one of them is the foundational one, which I think we could do a whole episode on, which is life and dignity of the human person. Because so rather than just jumping into a question about abortion, death penalty, all that, it's like, well, let's talk about all of this depends on a belief that the human person has life and dignity. And so a whole conversation around that. Another major theme is the option for the poor and the vulnerable, or the call to family and participation, rights and responsibilities, the dignity of workers, solidarity, care for God's creation.
Yeah.
So like these very like broad categories that serve as general themes can help, I think, orient us instead of getting lost somewhat in the details of like this particular social question, just sort of generally, So maybe we could do an episode, for example, on human dignity, and then an episode on an option for the poor, an episode on God's creation, and episodes on, rights and responsibilities, for example.
And it's good for us, Dave, to take general themes like that because you're living in United States, I'm living in Ireland, in Europe, and we will have different examples, from our different contexts. So yeah, I'm very happy to go at it like that. And also, it would be more interesting than sort of going through it historically either. Like, we don't just want to give a history lesson on this what was happening in the 19th century or whatever.
Sure. Very good. Yeah. So I think, we'll be back next time with the beginning of our 4-episode arc on this. And I think maybe the first one that we should talk about is, I think, the most foundational one, which is the life and dignity of the human person. Sort of just to get a Christian understanding of why it is that we care so much about these issues. It's because we believe that we're made in the image and likeness of God, and a lot of our social concern has to do with that, the person on the street that doesn't have adequate housing, people who can't afford healthcare. It's like, well, at the center of all this is we believe that the human person is made in the image and likeness of God.
Sounds good. I look forward to it, Dave. Do you also want to just shout out to our listeners and tell them how they can contact us?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely a shout out to all of our listeners around the world. We're very grateful for you listening to us and joining us. And if you have any feedback for us or any requests for certain kinds of topics, feel free to email us at hello@sonsofignatius.com. That's hello@sonsofignatius.com, or find us on Twitter, Sons of Ignatius, or whatever you have that you want to give us as feedback or suggestions, feel free. And we look forward to hearing from you.
I mean, just to say again that the general thrust of this podcast is about mission and the church's mission, and I suppose forming ourselves in the church's mission, understanding it so that we can better participate in it. So if there's anything, that like we're taking faith for granted, we're assuming that our listeners sort of get the God thing and the church thing, and we want to do it better. We want to be more fully engaged in the life and mission of the church. So yeah, if people have any ideas on what would be good for us to talk about, it'd be really good to hear those ideas. Otherwise, you're just going to hear us banging on about the things we're interested in, which I'm more than happy to do, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave.
Me
God
too.
bless. Bye.
Me too. Cool, buddy. All right, now, until next time, man. Peace out.